Okay, let's go ahead. I wanted to share just a couple of these. These are questions designed to explore some current myths in Alcoholics Anonymous. Answer these questions at the beginning of the work, like before the doctor's opinion, and again before doing the third step to see change in beliefs. These are some of the common myths. The first one is, do you believe the steps are meant to be worked once and live your life in 10, 11, and 12? I think most of us have seen the futility of that. And I would challenge anybody to show me a piece of AA literature from the founders that said the first 9 principles were meant to be practiced once. I haven't yet to see that. I think that was one of the main messages from Harry Tiebout. My great grand-sponsor, Paul Martin, knew him well. And his thing was that the ego will rebuild, and you give yourself... This is really a debate, 1 through 9 once, or 1 through 9 regularly. It's a debate that goes all the way back to our founders. Bill Wilson fell victim to the belief that he had had such a spiritual awakening, and it was probably more profound than most of us in this room. You don't just wake up one night with a blinding light in your room and sit down and write a chapter like How It Works, or the experience he had when he got sober. But he fell victim to the belief that would be enough, and he had many years of depression. Where Dr. Bob was from the school influenced by Harry Tiebout, where they believed in reworking the first 9 steps. So I ask people about that and see what their ideas change when they see what the textbook says. Another one is, do you believe alcoholism and drug addiction are the same? Do you believe that you can recover from alcoholism or that you'll always be recovering? My friend in Denver, Frank, always says those that are recovering usually aren't. A question about, do you believe what the main purpose of this book is to show other alcoholics precisely how we've recovered? Another one that we hear all the time, if an obsession to drink occurred, do you believe that you could think the drink through or remember the pain of your last drunk could keep you from drinking again? Here's a big one that you hear all the time. Question, do you believe that where drinking alcohol is concerned that you have a choice today? I believe this. I believe in an unfit spiritual condition, I had no choice but to drink. Now in a fit spiritual condition on the other end of the work, there's no choice to drink. There's a couple comments at the end of a couple of these chapters in the first step where people make statements like he couldn't drink even if he would. What does that mean? Or in the 10th and 11th step promises, which we don't hear talked about a lot, they promise that the problem will be removed. You'll be in a position of neutrality. My God, in a fit spiritual condition, how could you drink? Right. The day that I think now, after all these years, the day I think I have a choice, that's the insanity of alcoholism. And I never heard, I'm jumping ahead a moment here, but I never heard the insanity put any better than this. I never took the first drink drunk. That's the insanity of alcoholism. I always thought it was the crazy stuff we do under the influence. Here's a big question. Do you believe the only requirement for membership, a desire to stop drinking, is the only requirement for sobriety? Can your desire to not drink, which qualifies you as a member, can that desire keep you sober? Is the only requirement for membership to the fellowship, a desire to stop drinking, the only requirement for you to stay sober today? Are there any other alternatives for you but to die an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis? Do you believe you're suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer? Maybe you're suffering from an illness that some other thing can conquer it. And you're slowly working toward the realization of the ABCs. Here's another misconception. How many times do you hear this? I took the third step and turned my will and my life over to the care of God. If the third step was turning your will and your life over to the care of God, why would there'd be 3 steps? You'd be done. The third step is deciding to. The third step's not turning your will and your life over. We made a decision. It's a good decision, but it's like three frogs sitting on a log. All three decide to jump off. How many are left? I said none. They said three. All they did was decide, right? So there's some questions, and I'm sure as a sponsor, as someone that would be working with somebody, you have some of your own myths that you believed, that you're concerned about, that are current in AA nowadays. Ask them some of those beliefs at the beginning of the work, and ask them the same questions again before they start inventory, and see how the thinking and how the mind has changed. So they've had an assignment. They've read the first 164 pages. They've considered these 4 or 5 questions. They've sat with the questions. They've let the answers come. They've come back to your house. They've done the reading. They have an idea of what's going to be expected. They answer the questions, and then you decide. I had a lady one time. She came over. She was 11 years sober. She had hit a wall. She was a successful lawyer, had a pretty great life. She said she wanted to do the work. We did that initial assignment. The answers were great. We're ready to proceed. She goes to leave my apartment. She gets to the door. My intuition says, ask her to come back and sit down, and ask her about what else she does in her life but her job and AA meetings. Strange intuition. I asked her to come back and sit down. I said, what else do you do besides your law practice and AA? She said, well, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday I have individual therapy. Tuesday and Thursday I have group therapy. Friday I do my journaling class. On Saturday, ACA, and I'm on medication. I said, well, let me ask you this. Would you be willing to put all those other groups and all those other therapy things aside until you finish amends and consider at some point, medically supervised, because I'm not a doctor, to get off medication? She said, absolutely not. I said, medication or those other things that you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday? She said, those things. I said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Those things are taking you in one direction, how to manage your life, how to get everything in order, how to work on yourself, and this path is going to take you in the opposite direction. How to quit running your life. You can't fix yourself. And she wasn't willing. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And you have to make that decision sometime, or you'll both pay a price. But also remember, there's a price for whatever you decide. A lot of us know the price involved in not doing the work in this book. But there's a price for doing the work in this book. Self-sacrifice, confession of shortcomings. It gives you some promises that aren't necessarily attractive. There is a price for getting free. Isn't there times that some of you wish you didn't know what you know? That you were just ignorant again and you didn't see what you see about yourself or anything else? Waking up isn't always the greatest thing. It's a wonderful thing, but if your objective is comfort, I would settle for delusion if I were you. Delusion's a lot more comfortable than waking up. And I'm a loose cannon. I could just say anything and anything. Okay. So, we're going to look at the first step in 3 parts. Body, mind, and spirit. Take the first half of step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. If drugs are involved, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and or drugs. If you're looking at drugs. You don't have a drug history, don't do that. But it's important that if you do have a drug history that we look at both so you can find your own truth. Am I alcoholic? Am I addict? Am I both? Is there a difference? I mean, doesn't it make sense if everybody in this room lived with that same question that I lived with, that the first step answer that question? And that question that you're all very familiar with is, what's wrong with me? We're going to look at what's wrong with me physically once I start to put alcohol in my body. We're going to look at what's wrong with me mentally when there's no alcohol in my body whatsoever. And we're going to look at what's wrong with me spiritually, except when it gets a treatment. The only thing that isn't it funny that alcohol treats alcoholism? Alcohol treats alcoholism. Alcohol treated my spiritual malady. Nothing else in my life ever treated the spiritual malady, but you got to know what the spiritual malady is before you can ask yourself, did alcohol treat it or not? If alcohol was the problem, then all of us would have straightened out a long time ago by just eliminating alcohol from our body. Alcoholism is the stuff you're left with after your body is cleaned out. When the mind catches up to you. When that stuff that you've been suppressing for all these years with booze and drugs isn't suppressing it anymore and it starts to come to the surface. But it's important to start with what's wrong with me once I've put alcohol and or drugs into my system. We're going to use from the doctor's opinion to the top 2 lines on page 23 in there as a solution. You will find that after the top of 23, they're not going to talk much more about the physical craving. And it's also interesting, being a good textbook, if you know where that section ends, being a good textbook, they're going to end the section with a summary question that summarizes the only thing you need to be convinced of to go past page 23. Remember those good textbooks? They do addition. They give example, example, example. At the end, there's a test. Same with the 3 parts to step 1. So, and I think it's much more valuable than me just sharing my experience of what it was like to go through the doctor's opinion all these years, or for us to read the doctor's opinion. It's much more important I give you the tools that were shared with me on how to use the doctor's opinion so you can have your own experience. And the greatest tools, and this is a culmination of a lot of years and a lot of people all over this country that I've met, from Joe and Charlie to my sponsor to a lot of people that you guys have met. And the best thing that I've ever heard that you can share with someone on how do you use the doctor's opinion is to turn every statement you can into a question. Keep it in mind, it's the opinion of a non-alcoholic doctor. It's good to know where he came from. It's good to know that he's not one of us. It should not be page 1. They did not make a mistake changing that, I don't think. It was page 1 in the first edition. But I think it's been Roman numerals because it's an outsider's opinion about our program. But from Bill's story to 164, it's another alcoholic's and thousands of alcoholics' experience. But this is a doctor whose theory, his opinion, stands up till today with all that's been reviewed, neurotransmitters, chemical enzyme reactions in the body, neurotransmitters in the brain. With as much has been revealed, this theory still holds up in its simplicity. That the craving for alcohol is similar to an allergy. Some of you in this room, maybe you eat strawberries. Every time you eat strawberries, you get a rash. He says it's similar to that, but instead of a rash, we put alcohol in our system rather than strawberries, and we get a physical craving for more alcohol, beyond our mental control. He admits he didn't know much about the mind. He makes reference to the solution, but he was really an expert on the chemical reaction in the body of an alcoholic once the alcohol goes in his system. But I still, to this day, because of my background of therapy and too much knowledge, I don't like working with the word craving. My mind goes off over here. I simply use the question, do I lose control over the amount once I start to drink? After ingestion of alcohol, do I lose control over how much I'm going to drink? Some of you, not every time. Some of you are periodic. The great question for a periodic is, if there were times when the craving didn't happen, and there were times the craving did happen, were you the one in control over when it would and when it wouldn't happen? And it was just by chance. They weren't controlling when the craving happened and when it didn't, when they would lose control and when they didn't. Most periodics get drunk at the wrong time and are sober when they shouldn't be. But the only question is, do you have enough experience with alcohol to abundantly confirm that once you put it in your system, something happens where you lose control? But I will give you an example where if you know a couple words, it changes the whole meaning of the paragraph. Let's look at the paragraph. Well, here's some of the questions that so you start to read the doctor's opinion, you're looking for questions that pop out to you. Bottom of the first page, XXV. Am I the type that other methods failed completely? Question. So you're marking. And you're marking in a way where they stand out. So when you do what comes next, you can look at each page and you can see the questions that you mark. They're highlighted. Because I'm going to show you another. This is the mechanical work. This is the assignment. This is the stuff that feels like homework, but only setting you up to do the prayerful work. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Another question on the next page. This is a must. Do I believe my body is quite as abnormal as my mind? Okay. A couple more pages. Can I differentiate the true from the false? Did I drink for the effect produced by alcohol? I thought I was one type, normal in every respect. I found out I was all those types at any given moment. I can be a psychopath. I can be a manic depressive. I can be a type that's normal except in the effect alcohol has. But here's a paragraph where he does say something that's really important, but I don't know what he means until somebody shared with me. And that is, I don't know, in my book it's XXVII. But it's the paragraph that starts off, the doctor writes, and it has his letter. And the letter starts out, the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. Alcoholic addiction. But the next paragraph says, treating alcoholic and drug addiction. Is he making a distinction? Do you believe they're the same? You got to start to ask yourself if you have a drug history. But the paragraph I wanted to talk about for a moment is this. And let me read the paragraph. It starts off, we doctors. What is he saying here? We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology is of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. To this day, that paragraph doesn't make any sense to me. I don't even know what I just read. But if somebody explains to me that moral psychology is the doctor's way of saying spiritual experience, and that when he uses we, he's talking about doctors, and that when he uses the term powers of good, he's talking about God. Now let's read the paragraph. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of a spiritual experience is of urgent importance to alcoholics, but the application of a spiritual experience presented difficulties beyond a doctor's conception. What with a doctor's ultra-modern standards, a doctor's scientific approach to everything, we doctors are perhaps not well equipped to apply the power of God that lies outside a doctor's synthetic knowledge. Now I understand what he's saying. He knows what we needed, which is a spiritual experience, and he knew that he couldn't apply it to you. He couldn't make it happen for you. The same admission that Dr. Carl Jung came to about our minds. He wanted to help Roland or whoever it was that met Dr. Carl Jung, and he said he couldn't. Because he couldn't bring about a spiritual awakening, and they knew that that's what we needed. So, go through the doctor's opinion, mark and highlight so they stand out to you pertinent questions that you find from statements. Bill's story. The greatest things I've ever heard to use Bill's story, because see, I read Bill's story, I don't know about you, but I say, I don't relate to Bill Wilson. I've never been married, I've never been to war, and I'm not a stockbroker. But when an old-timer said to me, why don't you look for the similarities rather than the differences, that was not only a principle I could use for Bill's story, that was a principle I could use in the meetings. Look for the similarities. And they asked me, we're going to take Bill's story in two parts. Oh, I should back up for a moment, because I said, write out the first half of the first step. We admitted that we were powerless over alcohol. We're going to cut that in half. We're going to take the first half of step one and look at two parts to powerless. Physically, once I start to drink, and mentally, once I stop drinking. So we're taking the admission of powerless over alcohol and or drugs, and we're going to look at two parts. Two parts to powerlessness, one part to unmanageability. So the first half of step 1 we're taking in 2 parts. The first part is, why am I powerless over alcohol once I put it in my body? Bill's story we're going to look at in 2 parts, drunk and sober. Take the first 8 pages of Bill's story, which is his drunk-a-log, and mark everything you can relate to in 3 different areas. How he thought, how he felt, how he drank. I've seen women mark 3/4 of Bill's drunk-a-log when they were given the principle to look for the similarities in how he felt, how he thought, how he drank, rather than the differences. You will see, because we're really focusing on the physical craving, but you will see laid out in his drunk-a-log the progression of the physical craving. Then you might want to do it again when we're looking at the mental obsession, and you'll see the progression of your mental obsession. Then we're going to look at it again, the first 8 pages, to find the truth about his spiritual malady and the progression of the unmanageability. But basically, we're using the first 8 pages of Bill's story to get in touch with our own drunk-a-log, the progression of our own disease. Then what can you do with 9 to 16 in Bill's story? 9 to 16 in Bill's story, you can reaffirm the assignment that they already did, because in 9 to 16 you're going to get a great outline of what you're asked to do in the rest of the work. That might be a time to talk about, did you come up against anything in the first 164 pages that you're not willing to do? So what I have people do after they've marked what they can relate to in Bill's drunk-a-log, I have them mark what they're not willing to do that Bill did to recover. Now that can be a great tool for the sponsor as well as the sponsee. So 9 to 16, mark anything that you feel resistant to or unwilling to do, and be honest, because you're just starting the work. But I'll give you a clue for the sponsors. Don't take somebody past the first step until all the resistance in 9 to 16 is gone. Use what they mark in 9 to 16 as a barometer as to when they're done with step 1, and let what they marked in 9 to 16 show you when they're done with step 1. Because I'll tell you what, when somebody's had a deep experience with step 1, whatever they marked in 9 to 16, that resistance will be gone. One of the lines that always gets me, no matter to whatever degree my ego has rebuilt and it's time to do the work again, is the admission he makes that in and of himself that he is nothing, and that without God he's lost. I always feel a little resistant to that when my ego is rebuilt. But you'll find your own stuff, and be honest. It doesn't mean you can't go on. It means you've gotten in touch with what you might feel resistant to or unwilling to do in the rest of this process, and see if what you mark, maybe you could mark it in pencil. And as you move deeper and deeper and deeper into step 1, continue erasing the resistance you marked in 9 to 16 until the resistance is gone. That's when you're done with step 1. It's your decision as a sponsor as to whether you would take somebody any further if they were absolutely unwilling to do. Now, don't confuse with willing to do with able to do. Don't confuse their unwillingness with their lack of power. Am I willing to do what's in the first 164 pages? Yes. Do I have the power to do everything in the first 164 pages before I'm done with step 1? No. So don't confuse lack of power with unwillingness. I do not have the power at step 1 to finish amends or to do the disciplines in 10, 11, and 12. But am I willing? Am I willing to do? Or am I not? Mark the resistance in 9 to 16. Then you get to there is a solution, and we're going to use from 17. We're going to use from 17 to the top of 23. Continue to turn statements into questions. Mark the questions until you get to the top 2 lines on 23. And here's the question. Here's how I would turn that top 2 lines into a question. The top 2 lines say, the experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. Confirm what? So here's how I turn it into a question. Does my experience abundantly confirm that once I put alcohol into my system, something happens which makes it virtually impossible for me to stop? Which are the previous sentences. That's the only thing that the person you're working with or yourself, that's the only thing you need to be convinced of before going any further. So what if they're not convinced that once they put alcohol in their system? What if they're still grappling between drugs and alcohol? Keep going back. Do it again. Do it again. But now that you've done the mechanics, now that you've seen how to use the doctor's opinion, marking questions, now that you've seen how to use the first 8 pages of Bill's story, marking what you can relate to, now that you've seen how to use 9 to 16 to show you your own resistance, now that you've learned how to use 17 to 23, now that you've done the homework, which I like to call the mechanics, you've done the mechanics, now you go back through those chapters slowly in prayer and do the prayerful reviews. Now what does that mean? That means I would go back to the doctor's opinion, I would look at the first page, and I would sit with the first question I marked. And you will start to find that there's a flow between here and the top of 23, and you'll get in that flow. The first question, I don't know. The most valuable thing that's been shared with me about questions is you should look at them as coins. A question's like a coin. There's 2 sides to every question. The best example would be the most important one. Am I convinced that once I put alcohol in my system, something happens? Maybe I'm not convinced. Maybe my experience doesn't abundantly confirm that. Maybe I only got the craving once, ever. Maybe that doesn't really happen. And the questions that are the easiest for some of you that have been around, don't look at answering the question. Look at the other side of the coin. Does my experience abundantly confirm? Oh yeah, sure. And I just answered it away. Well, maybe now, see, and there's considerations after being around for a while you wouldn't share with the new guy. The new guy has done well enough to see that his drinking experience abundantly confirms that when he puts the stuff in his body, he gets a craving for more. So what would be a consideration for somebody with time? Maybe now the craving wouldn't happen. Maybe I've learned enough. Maybe the craving was just based on emotional states. Maybe I was an emotional drinker. Now I'm 22 years sober. I have tools to deal with my emotions, to turn out of resentment, to get free of fear. And if I was just an emotional drinker, maybe now that my emotions have straightened out, I could drink like a normal person. I wouldn't get the craving. You see, there's going to be lurking. My home group is so anal. We had a meeting once on lurking notions, and they actually talked about lurking notions like little fuzzy balls that hide in the fuzzy little monsters that hide in the corner of your room, and that each year and each time you start to work, the lurking notions would be different colors and different shapes and different parts of the house, because that's true. There's considerations now after 22 years that weren't valuable at 6 months. Maybe you weren't an emotional drinker. Maybe you were a circumstantial drinker. Things are bad, you drink. You get the craving. But now things are pretty good in your life. Maybe now you could drink like a normal person. So, and I'm going to make an analogy to this to another important question later in the work. But I would like you to look at the first step when you're looking at the craving and the obsession and ask yourself, did circumstance or emotional state have anything to do with the physical craving or the mental obsession? I drank when the team lost. Well, I drank when the team won. I drank when she left. Well, I also drink when she stays. Sometimes I don't know which to celebrate, staying or leaving. I drink when things are bad and I don't have any money. I also drink when I got a lot of money. Maybe my drinking, see, and I say maybe because I'm still considering. You're not answering. You're sitting with it. You're letting the first step create a tension that's going to follow you through the work. You lose that tension, you poop out, you balk. I start to feel this tension by looking at what it was like. But see, some of us in this room also have what happened. And we also have what it's like now. So if you've been around for a while, don't just look at the first step, what it was like when you were drinking. Remember what happened. And remember what it's like now. What's my relationship to this craving now? Because it's not a reservation about the craving from 22 years ago that's going to take me out. It's a reservation about the craving now, 22 years sober. Maybe that craving wouldn't happen. Sit with those reservations. You face those reservations in prayer, and I use the set-aside prayer until I get to the third step. Every day I'm saying it. When I sit down to work on an assignment, I'm saying it. When I'm looking at questions, I'm saying it. Let me have an open mind and a new experience with these questions. So prayerfully, I look at the first page of the doctor's opinion and I see the questions I marked and I sit with them. And I let one question move me on to the next. Let the experience move you on to the next. And that's when you'll start to experience the first step, is in the prayerful work. The mechanics are nice to get the questions marked, but the questions need to be considered. Do I really believe this? Do I believe this after all these years? That might have been true when I was drinking, but what about now? You see, my truth, I got to be really honest with you. I've ingested alcohol several times in 22 years. Does it matter my motive? I was at a party once. Reached for a glass of my water. I don't smell water. I don't sip water. It was hot. I drank half a glass just like that. It was vodka. Went in the bathroom and said a prayer. I was safe and protected. I didn't turn into a werewolf. I think some of us have probably ingested alcohol and been safe and protected and you didn't even know it. Food, medicine. Okay. So I can't say to you that I'm absolutely convinced that if I ingest alcohol into my body that I'll get a physical craving, but I believe God's there. Do I believe I could do that? Now there's the question that'll take me further. Do I believe I could do that every day for 60 or 90, take the Marty Mann test? A lot of people think Marty Mann, who was the first AA woman to stay sober in AA, who founded the National Council on Alcoholism, in her primer on alcoholism, she gave the Marty Mann test. But a lot of people interpret the Marty Mann test as 2 drinks a day for 30 days. It wasn't. It was 2 drinks a day, same time, same amount, same drink, every day for 6 months. Do I believe I could do that now? Whether you're new or you're old or you're in between. I've known people that had to go find out. They had to take the test. I know people that have taken the test and gotten free of AA. Am I willing to go to any lengths? But I believe God has more power to reveal truth about drinking than drinking does. Because I had 18 years of drinking and it didn't convince me, and I got 6 months in this process the first time and it's shown me more than 18 years of drinking. So my bet is that God has more power to show me the truth about the craving than more alcohol. And I ask, show me. And the truth is, most of my 18 years of drinking, I put booze in my system. I get a craving for more. But my truth in sobriety is that I've ingested alcohol several times in 22 years, whether it was by accident or not. And I've been safe and protected by the grace of God. I believe God's been there for the mental obsession, spiritual malady, and that I've been safe and protected, even when alcohol's gone in my system. Do I take that into a luxury? Do I make that into a luxury that I could drink safely? No. But it's a consideration. So I looked at what it was like. What happened is that something came between me and booze 22 years ago. And I haven't lost control over alcohol, even when it's accidentally gone into my system. See? There's incremental truth, you know. There's truth that's just not, that's delusion. There's truth that changes. But there's also truth that's only true until the next thing's true. Like I was powerless over alcohol until I came to believe in a power greater than myself, and I came to believe in a power greater than myself, and a conception was enough until I made a decision, and that decision was enough. You know, like 3 is true until 4 changes it. There's that kind of truth too. So, what it was like was I get a physical craving when alcohol goes in my body. What happened is something came between me and booze 22 years ago. And what it's like now is I'm in a state of neutrality, safe and protected. I haven't even sworn off. The problem has been removed. The problem has been removed to the point where when I've accidentally ingested alcohol, I don't turn into a werewolf or break out into a physical craving. But I'm not going to take that for granted. But I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask. See, I'm sharing experience with you today, not just from the first time through the work. The considerations will change the longer you're sober. And you got to, in the first 3 steps, explore some of these reservations that are coming to the surface, or you will explore them alone. Or you won't be able to say them in a group because you've elevated yourself to such a position you could never admit. The kind of 17 years sober, and I'm wondering about this or this or this. Do it in the process with someone you trust. In prayer, you're safe and protected. So I go back through the doctor's opinion. I go back through my drunk log in prayer, remembering, going back, looking. I remind myself, am I still resistant to the things in 9 to 16? Has some of the resistance already changed? Maybe I erase some of it. And then I look at the questions from 17 to 23. And I get to the top of 23. And I might sit with that consideration for 2 or 3 days. As long as it takes. Until I can say this. Yes, my experience abundantly confirms that once I put alcohol into my system, something happens where I lose control over the amount. And this is my truth today, whatever that might be. And do I believe there's levels of peace and freedom in existence beyond that I can't even imagine with freedom from alcohol? See, if there's any area of your life where you think this is it, then what you're saying is there is no more God. Any area you think, well, this is about all I'm going to get in this area. And this is about all the freedom I'm going to get in that area. Or this is as deep as I could ever see the first step. All you're doing is expressing your agnosticism. So you get to the top of 23, whether you're new, old, or in between, and your experience should abundantly confirm just one thing. It's just one piece of step 1. This is why I'm powerless over alcohol physically. Once it goes into my body, I get this craving. Yes, I'm convinced. Okay. Now we're going to move into the mind. But it's still the first half of step 1. This is why I'm powerless over alcohol and or drugs mentally with none in my system at all. If the first part was the physical craving, this is the mental obsession. And you're going to go from 23 to the bottom of 43 and turn every statement you can into a question. And isn't it interesting? This section ends with a summary question also. So you mark the questions. You mark the questions so you can see them. Highlight the questions that stand out to you. Most alcoholics have lost the power of choice. Do I believe that? Ooh, that's a little different than what they say in the meeting. This says it is true what they say. The book is right. The fact is, most alcoholics, doesn't say all alcoholics have lost the power of choice. So am I an alcoholic that lost the power of choice or not? And I would say if you're working with somebody and you get to this page and they're absolutely convinced they have a choice this day and every day from now on, don't go any further. Just choose not to drink the rest of your life. 24. Highlighted paragraph. Very important stuff. Has your so-called willpower become non-existent? Are you unable at certain times to bring into your consciousness with enough force the memory and the suffering of humiliation of a week or a month ago? Are you without defense against the first drink? So what does that do to think it through? What does that do to remember the pain of your last drink? What does that do with today I have a choice? If you're an alcoholic who doesn't have a choice, you better stay away from people that do, because you'll start to believe that you do. Find the people. You see, I don't see type 4s hanging out with type 1s in AA. I see this room filled with type 4s who don't have any other alternatives. I don't see a room full of people who had a choice today. If you had a choice today about being here or not, which I mean doing this work or not, why would you want to do this work if you had a choice? I've seen people try to go through the work who have a choice. Horrible process. It's a horrible process I think this process is for the choiceless, not just the powerless. So it says, most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice. They don't have a choice once they start because of the physical craving. They don't have a choice once they stop because of the mental obsession. But we're going to follow that idea all the way through the work. See, the first step doesn't end at step 1. But at this point, we're looking at what takes place in my mind before I even pick up a drink, at my very best. So what I like to do is go back to those periods of sobriety. I like to go back to those periods where I wasn't drinking. I never had 30 days in 18 years, but I have several periods close to 30 days. And I look, what happened? Did I want that to happen? Did I want to pick up a drink 28 days out of the Michigan State Penitentiary, having just walked out of my parole officer's office? He told me the conditions of my parole. You can't drink, you can't take drugs, you can't go to bars, you can't hang out with dope fiends, and you can't leave Calhoun County. That's like telling a guy like me, go home and take a deep breath and don't ever exhale again. Don't breathe. Because that's all I do. I drink, I take drugs, I hang out with ex-felons, and I leave Calhoun County to go to Detroit or Chicago. I said, oh, sure, no problem. And for 28 days, I was able to not drink, not take drugs, hang out with ex-felons, or leave the county. On the 28th day, on my second report, he reminds me of the conditions. Funny thing is, I was feeling better, looking better. Here's the one that would scare me. Your father and I are trusting you again. Ooh. The parole officer says, and your family believes in you again. And you just want to scream because you know you're going to break their heart. You know it's only a matter of time. And they reminded me if I broke my parole, I'd get 14 years behind the walls. And I walked out of his office, had an idea I needed a pack of cigarettes, no thought of walking into a bar, picked up a drink, called an ex-felon, and drove out of the county. And I didn't choose to do that. The day of my dad's funeral, my mother begged me not to drink. I said I wouldn't. I really meant it. I had no little sneaky voice in the back of my mind, and I said I won't. And I had 2 beers, and somewhere between the second one and the 20th one, I lost the power of choice, and I showed up so drunk at my dad's funeral, they tied me to a tree by my ankle with a chain because I was brought by a guard. I didn't choose to do that. So if you're looking at the craving or the obsession, don't go back to the times when you got drunk and you wanted to. A guy said to me once, I'm alcoholic because every time I drank, I got drunk. I said, did you want to get drunk every time you drank? He said, yeah. I said, then you're not alcoholic because it went the way you wanted every single time. You're supposed to look at the times where you wanted it to go this way, but it went this way. Some of you remember not being able to get drunk and drinking through the drunk back to sober. Some of you remember being with the right guys and you're supposed to drink a lot because you're with those guys and you have a few and your tolerance is all messed up and you're flat on your face after a few and you wanted to have a whole lot. Don't look at the times where your drinking went the way you wanted it to when you're looking at the craving. And when you're looking at the obsession, don't go back to those times where you wanted to quit and stayed stopped. Go back to the times where you wanted to quit and you couldn't stay stopped. That's powerless. Powerless mentally is when you want to not drink and you can't not drink. And mark those questions. And then come back to them in prayer. Do I have any more than 2 alternatives? Am I without defense against the first drink? Or is there a relapse prevention plan that can work for me? You see, how can you prevent your next relapse if you're powerless over alcohol? These chapters from 23 to 43 describe people who could not prevent their next relapse. And once again, we're going to take circumstance or emotional state out of it. Take a look at each of the stories in There Is a Solution and more about alcoholism. One guy's feeling great, not a cloud on the horizon. One guy's mad because he's working for a company he used to own. Another guy has an insane idea. He can mix whiskey with his milk. And another guy doesn't think at all. I am absolutely convinced, just looking at you all, there are people in this room who found themselves in front of the 5th or 6th drink and didn't even know how they got there after a period of sobriety, with no thought. Thinking it through is not going to work on that day. 100 quarters in your pocket, you're not going to put one on the phone and call somebody that's going to be able to stop you. Why? Because no human power can relieve your alcoholism. And we got these sponsors and these groups filled with mechanism that are supposed to stop you if you get the obsession to drink. I went to one group like this in a small town, and a member walked up to me and gave me the 13th point, the 13 points to prevent a relapse that their group uses. Not one of them had anything to do with doing anything in here to find a relationship with God. It had to do with what you could do to keep yourself from drinking. But how can I be powerless over alcohol if I can keep myself from drinking? So you look at the questions again in prayer that you've marked from 23 to 43. And isn't it interesting? At the bottom of 43 is the only thing that you need to be convinced of to go any further. It's the test. Last paragraph, 43. Do I believe that at a certain time there will be no effective mental defense against the first drink? Do I believe me or any other human being is going to be able to provide that defense? Must my defense come from a higher power? See, and the great thing the new person needs to see is that that defense is already being provided by a higher power, and they don't need to go anywhere to find it. If they're alcoholic and they're sober, that defense is already there. We think that God is it feels like it's so far away. We feel so distant from it. But I'm already in the grace of God because I'm sober. I read a great line the other day in the Quran. This is September 11th. It said, God's closer than your jugular vein. The provider of the next emotion. The provider of each thought. The provider of the next breath. And it feels like it's so far away. But if you're alcoholic and you can't keep yourself sober, but you're sober, that defense is already there. It's already found you. It's already found you. Now we just need to have the things cleared away that block us from finding it. Deeper and deeper and deeper. So am I convinced of the bottom of 43? If not, go back. So up to this point, we only have 2 points. Why am I powerless over alcohol physically once it goes into my body? Doctor's opinion to 23. Am I convinced, does my experience abundantly convince that once I put alcohol in my system, something happens where I lose control over the amount? And then point number 2, am I powerless over alcohol mentally with none in my body at all? Can I keep myself stopped once I stop? No one in this room has problems stopping. The body can only take so much over a given period. But can you stay stopped? Staying stopped is my problem. And the insanity of alcoholism is picking up the first drink. There's men and women in this room that never left the house, never got in trouble, never went to jail, never went to the penitentiary, never went to treatment, that are full-blown alkies. Because of those 2 points. It's not 30 questions. I don't do well on the 30. Do you lose time from work due to drinking? No. That's all they want is a yes and no, right? No. But they don't ask me, do you have a job? Does alcohol interfere in your marriage? No. I'm not married. There's only 2 questions. Do you lose control when you start, and do you lose control when you stop? Take all the drama. See, and this consideration that I was given works for those with a lot of drama and those with very little drama. Take the drama or lack of drama right off the top of your drinking. You're not alcoholic because of where it took you. Guy at 1311 York Street, looked like you a little bit, Scary Frank, sat with me one night for coffee, and he said, why do you think you're alcoholic? What? God forbid you should ask anybody that in AA nowadays. And I went to the penitentiary. He said, well, that lady over there never went to the penitentiary. She's alcoholic. What does that mean? She's not. You are? Well, I went to 10 treatment centers. Well, that guy over there never went to treatment. He's an alkie. What does that mean? He's not? He said, take all the drama and skim it right off the top and just look at 2 questions. Can I control it once I start? And can I keep myself stopped? That's it. Now we get to the dash, which is not fill in the blank. I thought it went like this. Yes, I admit that I'm powerless over alcohol, and that's why my life is so unmanageable. So now that I'm not drinking anymore, everything should just be hunky-dory. I didn't know that they meant drunk or sober. My life is unmanageable. So it took me 6 months. It wasn't 6 months to hit bottom with the first half of step 1. I was already convinced. It took me 6 months to hit bottom with the second half of step 1. And with everything better and feeling good and having a ball, little girlfriend, little income, place to stay, loving the fellowship, loving the meetings, I woke up around 6 months sober and I saw this unmanageability is inside of me. And thank God every day. You should thank God every day the unmanageability is inside of you, because if it's outside of you, you'll spend the rest of your life fixing the world and nothing will happen in here. What did they mean, these old timers? How come we don't hear that anymore? It's an inside job. And we sit in the meetings focused on the outside manifestations of an inside spiritual condition. And as long as that spiritual condition doesn't stay the same, it doesn't matter if the faces change. You'll be with 100 hers, and it'll always be her. And on one day she does A, B, C, and D. The next day she does basically the same thing. One day you're fine, the next day you're screaming your head off. She didn't change. What changed? The unmanageability of my life is an internal condition. And we're going to use 44, 45, a little bit, and mainly the middle paragraph on 52 to look at the second half of step 1, which is the spiritual malady, which is the unmanageability, which is untreated alcoholism. Take those 3 terms and ask you, are there any difference between the 3? Unmanageability, untreated alcoholism, and a spiritual malady. They're all 3 the same. A lot of people tell you it's a twofold disease. My hat's off to them. If they got a twofold disease and the mental obsession's been removed, God bless them, let them get on with their lives and fix themselves. I don't have a twofold disease. I am not powerless over alcohol because of the physical craving, and my life is unmanageable because of the mental obsession. I haven't had the mental obsession for over 20 years. I'm powerless over alcohol because of a physical craving coupled with a mental obsession that make me powerless, and my life is unmanageable because of a spiritual malady, which means not that my spirit is sick, it means that shut off from it is a hell of a malady. I have something within me that's 100% pure. And I'm being shut off from it is a horrible way to live. That's why my life is unmanageable. And if you want to know where the book says that, it says that just before the 3rd step. We're not only bodily and mentally ill, we are spiritually sick, and when the spiritual malady is treated, we straighten out mentally and physically. That doesn't mean we become smart. That means we don't get the craving anymore because we don't get the obsession anymore. We have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Does that mean that smoking cigarettes and being overweight means that I haven't straightened out physically? No. It means I'm lazy and I need to quit smoking cigarettes, but I don't get the mental obsession anymore. You got to know what they mean bodily and mentally. We've just spent 53 pages looking at physical and mental sickness. I'm sick physically because my body reacts different to alcohol, and it creates acetone, which makes a craving for more booze. And I have a lot of other physical stuff. And I had cirrhosis, The fact that I'm on my 2 feet standing upright, I'm not an animal anymore. I live like a pretty much regular person on a spiritual path is a hell of a step up from being an animal who had to drink every day. We forget that sometimes. Oh, the relationship isn't perfect. I don't have $10 million in the bank. I don't have everything that I've ever wanted. No, you don't wake up with that. Remember what it was like to wake up to that every day. What your mind would do. What your spirit was like. What your emotions were like. What personal relationships were like. So, being a good textbook on page 44, They're going to remind you of what you need to be convinced of in the first paragraph. In the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. They hope they've made clear between the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And if they haven't, here's the 2 points. When you honestly want to, you find you can't quit entirely, which means stay stopped because of your mind. And when drinking, you have little control over the amount because of the physical craving in your body. You're probably alcoholic. But I learned this from one of the original members of AA, Gene Cooper. He was a member of the Red Brigade of the Oxford movement and came to AA when it was 3 or 4 years old from the Oxford group. And he said this book was written by alcoholics for alcoholics, and in certain places they will put what's called traps for people that are looking for a way out. And in this, not a way out that they meant, I mean a way out of what we're doing. And in this paragraph there's several of those traps. If, or, probably. And if you've been working all this time with somebody, whether they're new, old, or in between, and they're not clear about one or the other, the obsession or the craving, they will come to this paragraph and they will say to you, see, it doesn't say you got to have both. It says, if when you honestly want to, you find you can't quit entirely, which is the obsession, stay stopped. Or when drinking, you have little control over the amount, which is the physical craving. See, it doesn't say you have to have both. You only have to have one or the other. It ain't or. Here's the problem. If every time you drink you get a physical craving, but you don't get a mental obsession, then just make up your mind and don't ever drink again. Or you get the mental obsession on a regular basis, but you don't get the physical craving, then the next time you get an obsession, just drink the way you want. You got to have both to be powerless. And that's the first half of step 1. And I wish we were a little further along, but we'll take a break now and see where we get before lunch. And keep in mind that up to this page, up to this paragraph, but now they're going to start to present some other ideas that take you into the second half of step 1. Up to this page, 44, up to this paragraph where they just reviewed the only 2 points you need to be convinced of, all you've looked at is the first half of step 1. Up to the dash. Okay, we'll come back at 11:30.